The lilies along Fifth Avenue looked like they had been carved from ice. Organ pipes lifted a sober hymn, silk rustled, and the pews leaned forward as one. The groom's space at the altar stayed empty. A murmur slid down the nave and pooled at the doors. They stayed shut. Nathaniel Mercer was already west of the Hudson coal grit on his cuffs and a ticket tucked in his vest. The train breathed like an animal that had run too far. It banged and clattered and shivered in past smokestacks and barns and winter fields cut to stubble. He laid his grandfather's pocket watch on the seat beside him and felt the weight of it roll with every curve. The chain flashed whenever the car's lamps flickered. In his coat pocket, the paper creased from so much reading whispered when he touched it. Silas's hand had been steady even near the end. "I bought Juniper Ridge. You were a boy when you said the West sounded like an open bell. Go hear it ring." Nate watched his city life fold itself away like linen, names he had been born into, a wedding written in other hands. He pressed the window pane and saw himself twice, once in the glass and once in the black beyond, and did not look long at either. By the time the Union Pacific coughed into Ash River, Wyoming territory, the air had a bite that felt clean inside his nose. Snow held to the mountain seams. The depot was a raw plank box with a stove that rattled and a map on the wall that gave the false comfort of straight lines. The station agent glanced at Nate's shoes and gave the faintest smirk. It said new, and it said a little foolish, and it said he might be all right if he learned fast. "Looking for the hotel?" the man asked. "Juniper Ridge," Nate said. "You know the way." The agent's brows went up. "Silas Mercer's boy, then. Out south on the mesa beyond Sage Creek. You got a horse under that suit." "I can rent one," Nate said. "Livery across the street. Talk to Gus. Sun's dropping. If you're set on seeing that place today, ride fast." Ash River had a single street, and 3 saloons to argue about which was best. The wind found the gaps between buildings and ran there. Nate crossed to the livery and bought a gaunt bay with careful eyes. The saddle leather was cold, and so was the bit. His gloves were still New York. They creaked and stuck. The horse took his weight like a shrug and turned its ears at the road. He saw him before he heard his name. A vest of bottle green. A gold watch chain drawn tight as a smile. Boots polished like a resignation letter. Barrett Cole stood in the doorway of the Ash River house and let warmth and piano notes bleed out around him. "You must be Mercer Cole," said, and his voice was soft where the wind was not. "Nate Mercer," he said. "Barrett Cole," the man said. "Welcome to our little corner. I own the bank. When men need something more than luck, they come to see me." "I only need directions," Nate said. "You already have them," Cole said, and pointed at the horizon with 2 fingers. "Juniper Ridge. Folks say it is unlucky. I say places get the reputation men give them. You know what thirst is worth out here." Nate kept from glancing at the chain. "Water is worth everything," Good Cole said. He looked pleased at the answer and somehow displeased too. "If you find the winter too long, bring me your paper. I pay fair." A badge scraped in the doorway behind him. The sheriff had the kind of posture that knows when to duck. Hal Pike set a tin cup down on the bar and ran a cloth over the star at his chest until it shone. He did not speak. His eyes slid from Cole to Nate to the door to the street and kept moving. "Sun is going," Cole said. "No sense riding hungry. Ate yet." "I will eat at the Ridge," Nate said. Cole smiled with only half his face. "Will you now?" Nate rode while the light thinned. The horse's breath smoked. Sage made a dry whisper under hoof and boot. When Sage Creek showed silver between cottonwoods, the land lifted and laid itself down again like a sleeping thing. Juniper Ridge was all ribs and shadow at first. The cabin leaned. The porch sagged where wet had found the joists. Tin shingles curled like old paper. A raccoon had left a scatter of husks at the threshold as if he owned the place and would be back to collect rent. Nate tied the bay to a post that still held. The rope burned his palm when the horse tugged. He liked the hurt. It felt like something he had done for himself. Inside smelled of ash that had gotten damp and then dried wrong. There was a hearth of fieldstone, a table that sat 3-legged and stubborn 2 chairs that had remembered fights, mouse droppings on the sill, and a bird's nest in the rafters. He moved careful and spoke without sound. His breath made a cloud, and the cloud did not reach the ceiling. He went room to room and came back to the door, because he did not trust the roof above the bed frame. He found the well behind the house by the way the ground wanted to settle near it. Juniper needles had drifted across the cover. The planks had gone soft at the edges. He stepped back and listened. The quiet held, but there was a patient sound under it, a note so low it felt like the earth had taken a slow drink and was thinking about another. He brought wood in under one arm and shavings in the other. Fire came on the 3rd try when he learned to lean and not to blow with his city lungs. It crawled, and then it found itself. He set a tin pot and watched water reflect orange and then boil. He put oats in and missed the moment between simmer and scorch. The smell of burned sugar filled the cabin, and he laughed once short and scraped the black from the pan. He ate what was left. He took the blanket from his roll and a second one from a trunk that had not kept mice out, and he made a bed on the porch boards where the stars could find him. The sky had more of them than he had been told. He lay on his side, and the railroad ran in his head for a while, metal on metal, then that sound thinned, and the other took its place. Deep and slow and far. Water somewhere under him threaded through stone, polite as a whisper in church. He woke when the cold found his teeth and then slept because it had nowhere else to go. The horse shifted the rope. The ridge cracked as the frost gave way under it. In the thin hour before light, something moved out in the dark and stopped moving when he sat. He had left his boots by the door, and they were harder than wood. He worked his feet into them and let the porch explain itself with small noises. Morning pulled from east to west in a careful line. The creek showed a thin skin of ice where the current slowed near the bank. Magpies claimed the top rails of a fence that had lost the argument with weather. The horse had hay breath. Nate rubbed his hands together and got back blood under his nails, where he had not noticed he had torn them. He felt awake in a way that coffee could never do. He walked the yard. He counted posts that could be saved and ones that would just cut like rot. He pushed his shoulder against the barn door, and it gave enough to see the skeleton inside rafters like ribs and sunstripes across the dirt. He touched a hammer he found there and set it back down without thinking. It made a small circle of dust when it landed. He turned because the horse had made the kind of sound that means someone else is here. He knew the difference already, and it made him grin, even as his stomach went tight. A bay mare stepped into the yard like she belonged to it. The woman who rode her wore a canvas duster and a scarf the color of river clay. Her hat brim was pulled low. A rifle lay along her thigh, the way a hand lays along a table edge, easy until it needs not to be. She swung down without hurry. The mare lowered her head and blew, and that was the only soft thing. The woman's eyes took the place in one sweep. The well, the porch, the rope burn on Nate's hand, the New York still clinging where it could. "Morning," Nate said. He kept his voice even and found the place in his mouth where the city had less weight. Her gaze came back to him and stayed. "You are standing on my land," she said. The rifle did not move. The air got very clear. The creek talked under its ice like it could not help itself. Nate's watch ticked in his pocket, and he felt every tooth in the gear. He did not reach for anything. He did not take a step. He kept his breath where it was and lifted his empty hands just enough that a person could see how they were. "My name is Nate Mercer," he said. "I have papers for Juniper Ridge." Her mouth changed in a way that was not a smile. "Riley Quinn," she said. "I have blood on it." He looked at her and saw that she was telling him everything he needed to know without adding any more words. The horse stamped. A juniper berry let go of its branch and fell into the snow with the smallest sound. He nodded once. "Then we should talk," he said. Later she said, "First I decide whether you stay." The rifle's sight hung at the space between his eyes. The morning kept getting brighter. The cold kept doing what cold does. The place around them took one long breath and then held it. The lilies on Fifth Avenue were very far behind him now. He kept his hands up and waited. Riley did not blink. The front sight stayed settled. Nate felt the little hairs along his forearms wake and listen. "Papers," she said. He moved slow. He drew the folded deed from his vest with 2 fingers and set it on the porch rail where the light could find it. She stepped close enough to smell leather and juniper on her coat and looked without touching. Her eyes tracked names and dates. Her mouth shifted a fraction when she saw Silas Mercer. "Patrick Quinn never signed a sale," she said. "My grandfather did not buy from Patrick," Nate said. "He bought from the court after, that is the stamp." She looked up at him, then not at the paper. Something like heat moved and then was gone. "Court does not mend fence," she said, "or keep cattle from freezing, or tell snakes whose doorstep is whose." Her gaze went to the yard. "You do not know this ground." "I can learn," he said. "That is a claim," she said. "I will take a test." She picked up the paper and handed it back without comment, then pointed at the cabin. "Show me your roof." He walked her through the rooms. She did not waste words. The hammer sat where he had left it. She reached up, tugged a loose tin shingle with her gloved hand, and it came free with a rasp. She let it fall so the noise would travel through his bones. "You sleep here, you die when it snows hard," she said. He nodded because it was true. "Stack wood," she said, "then carry water, then we see if you can hold a nail straight." That was the day's shape. He cut and split until his shoulders sang and his palms stung. He carried buckets from Sage Creek breath-clouding and the iron handle biting his fingers. She watched the way he lifted and did not move to help. When he fumbled a knot, she made him untie and do it again. When he set a nail and bent it, she took the hammer and raised it and then gave it back. "You are not pounding," she said. "You are setting. See the line. Hit to the line." His grip changed because she said it like that. The next nail sank clean with 2 strokes, and he let the relief stay in his chest where she could not see it. They ate on the porch when the light went thin. The oatmeal had stopped being burned. She produced a tin of coffee from her saddlebag and a narrow pot, and the smell of it worked through him like heat through wet cloth. "Thank you," he said. She shrugged. Patrick always said coffee keeps a man honest. A magpie argued from the fence line. The creek talked in its low winter voice. He kept from asking about Patrick in the way a man keeps from touching a bruise until he must. "How did he die?" Nate said quietly. Riley's jaw worked once. She looked at the yard like she could see him there. Shot once, close enough to smell powder. She reached to the rifle that leaned against the step and checked the chamber by feel. They said bandits. Then they said he drank. He did not drink enough to forget where home is. "I am sorry," Nate said. "It does nothing," she said. "Learn to swing a hammer without hitting yourself. That is something." In the days that followed, she kept coming back. She never said she would. She arrived and tied her mare to the same post and moved through the work like she had written it. He learned her rhythm. She was right-handed with a rope and left-eyed with a rifle. She tapped beams with the butt of her knife and listened for hollows. When he slid off the roof wrong and scraped his side, she said nothing, only set the ladder again and held the base with her boot. He learned his hands. The skin along his palm raised into lines that caught sawdust. He could look down and see where he had been the day before. He caught himself reaching for the watch in his pocket less often until the habit flickered only when the wind had a certain sound. They rode to town for supplies when the nails ran low. Ash River had its same single street and its 3 saloons arguing under their breath. The wind carried coal smoke and something sweet from a bakery hidden in a side alley. Riley walked him into Hendry's Mercantile and began to stack things on the counter. Wool trousers, a second shirt, a coat with sheepskin at the throat, a tin of axle grease. She touched each item like she had weighed it before. Barrett coal was already there. He picked up a roll of ledger paper, looked through it at the light, and smiled when he saw them in the glass. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "and Miss Quinn. The Ridge has callers these days." Riley did not look at him. She counted cartridges into a little box and snapped the lid shut. Nate kept his weight even over his feet. "We need winter goods, Mr. Cole." "Need is a word that changes flavor when the creeks falter," Cole said. The gold chain at his vest moved when he breathed. "I have terms for men who prefer water to dust. My door is always open." "You keep it oiled," Riley said. Cole looked at her then like he was measuring grain. "Miss Quinn, your uncle had a way with land. Shame about the end of it." "It is not ended," she said. Sheriff Hal Pike stood near the stove with a tin cup. He had a sleepless look about him. His eyes went to Cole and to the floor and to the flame. He did not come over. He did not leave. His star caught the light and tossed it off again. They left the store with bundles roped behind the saddle. Outside the door, a broad man with a limp and a clear gaze stepped in their path and took off his hat to Riley. "Captain Eli Garber," he said. "Quinn, I knew your uncle. Mercer, your name is going to bounce off the hills for a while. Mind how it comes back." Nate shook his hand. The grip had weight to it. Garber's eyes took measure and did not force it to show. "You got friends outside of town," Garber said. "You will need them before ice thaws." "We need nails and hands," Riley said. "And water," Garber said. His mouth tilted not quite humor. "Always water. Good day to you both." They rode home in a pale light the color of pewter. The wind ran low and fast along the ground. In the hollow below the ridge, they crossed a track they had not made. The horses' ears said so before their eyes did. Riley looked at it and said nothing. At Juniper Ridge, the work waited the way work does. They set a new crosspiece above the door. They repaired the hearthstone by stone. He learned how to lay mortar so that it filled and did not smear. She showed him a knot that loosened only when asked. The gelding that had come with the place watched them from the far edge of the yard, a sway-backed bay with a split ear and a suspicious eye. Riley looked at the horse the way a locksmith looks at a stubborn door. "He has a name," she said. "If you can take a halter on him, you get to learn it." It took an hour of careful circles. Nate did not crowd. His hands did not lie. He talked under his breath without thinking, and the horse twitched an ear at the tone. When the rope slid over the nose and settled, and the jaw did not set, Nate let out a breath he had not meant to hold and stroked the warm line of neck. The gelding lifted his head and leaned into the hand just enough to be called that. Atlas Riley said. He carried Patrick through a blizzard once. It made him think too much of himself. He earned it, Nate said. Riley's mouth softened at the corner. So did Patrick, she said. They ate early. The sky had that flat lead look that means weather will not bother to knock. She took a small book from her coat and set it on the table with a slap to shake dust. It had grease on the edges and ash on the cover. Patrick kept notes, she said, not the kind the court cares about, the kind about calves and storms and neighbor men who lie easy. He wrote about water. He said it is a thing a man holds gentle or it breaks his hand. Nate flipped it open. The handwriting had a firm line and no ornament. There were crude maps, little arrows that followed Sage Creek and then stopped. A drawing of a well with a stone lining and a square where a square did not belong. He looked up. You think there is something down there? I think Patrick did not trust the bank or the church, Riley said. He trusted rock. They went out to the well together. The planks over the mouth had gone dark with weather, but the grain still showed. Riley crouched and ran her fingertips along the edge. The nails had a different head from the nails on the porch. Someone had been careful here. She put her ear to the wood. Her hair caught a burr and she did not move to free it. You hear it, she said. He lay his cheek on the cold plank and closed his eyes. The sound was not sound, not really. It was a feeling that steady things have when they are long and deep and meant to stay. He nodded. Tomorrow, she said. We lift it with a chain winch. If the lining is good, we go slow. Tonight, he said, and she shook her head before he had finished it. Light and rope and patience, she said. You are not crawling down the throat of the earth with a lantern and a hope. Not when you can help it. They brought the lamp inside and set it on the table. The cabin glowed like a coal laid open. He checked the door latch. She checked the rifle and slid it into the corner where it could see the room. They sat across from each other and did not talk for a time because sitting can be work too. When the wind swung, the smoke in the chimney snarled and then found its path again. Atlas blew once in the yard and settled. Nate stood, went to the shelf, and reached for the coffee pot to warm what was left. He did not get there. A clip of boot on gravel that did not belong. A shadow slipped across the window as if the night had grown a blade. Riley's head turned and stilled. The lamp flame woke taller as if it were listening. Wood popped in the stove. Something soft scuffed outside the door near the latch. Nate set his palm flat on the table without looking, and Riley's hand was there, first two fingers touching his wrist, a warning to hold. The shot cracked through the wall beside the hearth, threw splinters across the room, and blew the lamp into darkness. The room went black. Powder stung the air. Nate dropped cheek to splinters as Riley rolled toward the shadow by the hearth. The second shot punched daylight through the wall and took a chip from the fieldstone. Riley's rifle cracked once. A man outside cursed. Boots scrambled on frozen dirt. Nate crawled to the door, felt for the latch, and stilled when Riley's palm found his sleeve. Wait. The cabin breathed around them. The stove clicked as iron cooled. Atlas stamped once in the yard and snorted hard. Silence widened. Then the soft hiss of someone backing into juniper. A twig broke. Riley sighted on the sound and fired. Another curse farther this time. The dark settled again thicker for the shots that had cut it. Riley said nothing. She slid to the lamp, cupped the chimney, coaxed the wick with a match. The little flame climbed, found itself, and the room returned in amber. The bullet hole in the log channeled a thin line of cold. Cole's boys, she said. Her voice was flat. He wants to see who is home. Nate looked at the ragged edge of wood. The angle was low, meant for a kneecap or a leg. He found his breath and pushed it steady. We do the well at first light, Riley said. Then we go to town. They slept in their boots. The lamp turned down to a pinch of flame and left a dim coin of light on the table. Nate woke every time the wind shifted and thought he heard a foot in the yard. He stopped counting. Dawn came hard and blue. The cold had a clean bite. They pried the planks from the well cover and leaned them against the wall. Frost furred the edges. Riley checked the iron eye sunk in the stone, tugged, then hit it twice with a mallet until the sound rang true. They set the chain winch on a tripod, legs dug deep into the hard ground. Riley tied knots that locked when loaded and freed when asked. Nate tested the rope on his own weight. The fibers groaned once, then settled. Riley handed him the lantern and looked straight at him, not past him. You signal. 1 tug for stop. 2 to lower. 3 fast to come up. He nodded. His mouth was dry. He lowered himself over the rim and felt the stone scrape his coat. The well-held breath that had been underground all night. It smelled like limestone and old pennies. The lantern made a small circle of color. He went down slow feet to stone rope, paying out smooth over Riley's glove. 20 feet. The mortar lines ran true, then shifted. He swung a little, set his boots, and lifted the lantern. 1 stone in the ring sat proud by a finger's width. clean edges where others had worn round, a square where a square did not belong. He set his palm to it. It gave with a scrape that rumbled like a throat. A small cavity waited behind. His fingers touched wax and oiled cloth. He worked it free, heart slamming. He tied the packet to a second cord and tugged 3 times. The rope above him answered with strength. Up it went, ticking against the stones. Riley's face appeared as a pale oval at the rim. Her eyes widened at the shape of the bundle and then narrowed at the rope in his hand. 2, he called, lower. He went down 10 feet more to check the lining for tricks. Nothing else, only the deep, slow sound of water somewhere below. He tugged 3 times and felt the rope bite his hands as Riley hauled. His feet climbed stone by stone. His shoulders burned. His chest ached. He reached the edge and Riley's fingers caught his coat and pulled him to the snow. They did not open the packet at the well. They carried it inside and laid a clean towel on the table like a ritual. Riley cut the wax with a knife. Oiled cloth peeled back and gave the smell of cotton and dust and something older. Inside were pages tied with blue string, a survey hand with a hard right slant, elevations and depths, a map that traced a river no one could see, Red Mesa Aquifer written at the top in block letters that would have looked at home on a courthouse wall, a certificate with a seal pressed deep, territory of Wyoming water rights registration, Patrick Quinn claimant, date and witness, judge's signature, clerk's stamp. Riley's hand found the edge of the map and stopped there. Her fingers pressed the paper light as if it could startle. Patrick rode to the Capitol, she said. He told me he had business with rock and ink. I thought he meant fencing. Nate lifted the certificate and found a page beneath it with smaller type. Conditions of transfer. His eyes tracked the lines, hungry and careful. His chest went hollow when he reached the clause that mattered. If the land passes from Quinn blood, he read the rights vest in a council of proprietors within the watershed to be administered for the common benefit. Riley blew out. It was not a laugh and not a curse. It took fog from the cold air and turned it into a small cloud. He thought like that, she said. He said water does not like to live in one hand. Nate let the page rest. The seal looked back at him sober and official. The room seemed to shift a notch toward clear. The wind went up the slope, then down again. A hard knock came at the door that made both of them reach at once. Riley cracked it and let Otis Crow in. Snow clung to his beard and melted slow. He warmed his palms at the stove and did not speak until his fingers got a little color. Judge Edwin Whitaker rolls in this evening, he said. He likes room 12 at the Ash River House because the window faces the cottonwoods. Riley looked at the packet. Otis followed her eyes with his and nodded once, like a man who sees rain in a certain kind of cloud. You found it, he said. Nate showed him the seal. Otis did not touch it. He smiled without showing his teeth. Good, he said. Paper that heavy needs a judge to stand behind it. Glass shattered at the back window and rained inside. A bullet hit the hearth and took a chip off the corner they had just set. Otis dropped to a knee and fired through the back door hinge. Riley pulled the lamp behind the table. Nate grabbed the packet and stuffed it deep under his shirt where the heat of his body would keep the oil supple. Boots thumped on the porch. A hand tried the latch. Riley leveled the rifle. The door shook and held. A voice called from the yard. Cole's man called Nate's name like it was a joke. Otis fired again. Someone yelped and swore and the boots retreated. A horse squealed. Hooves beat away across the hard ground and faded. Otis listened to the space the way a hunter listens to a clearing. He stood only when he was satisfied there would not be a third try. You have their attention now, he said. Best take the kitchen door at the hotel when you go. I will keep the ridge from burning for a few hours. They saddled with hands that shook only when they were still. Snow began as a thin, fitful drift. By the time they hit the flats by Sage Creek, it had sharpened to grains that rattled on coat canvas. In Ash River, the street lamps wore little caps of white. The hotel kitchen door stood open to let steam run off, and the cook did not look up when Riley and Nate slid through with their collars raised. The hallway to the back offices smelled like boiled beef and soap. Nate stopped at a clerk's desk outside a narrow door with painted letters. Office hours. The young man with the ledger took one look at Riley's face and stood. Judge Whitaker is between callers, he said. You have 5 minutes if you have business. They did. They had more than 5 minutes worth, but they fit what mattered into the time that existed. Whitaker sat with a pen in his hand and a book of cases at his elbow. He was older than the bench looked made for, and his name felt heavy in his mouth when he said it. He took the packet and spread it with a care that made Nate like him before he wrote a word. He read. He compared seals to his register. He checked dates. He held the map up to the lamp and the lines through their shadows on his sleeve. He nodded once to something only he saw. "This was properly filed," he said. "The condition is unusual. It stands." Nate felt the chair take his weight in a new way, as if the wood had decided to help. Whitaker dipped his pen and made notes in a hand that ran quick and clear. He set the seal of the court next to Patrick's, pressed the metal hard, lifted it, and looked satisfied at what the pressure had left behind. "I will prepare a public notice in the morning," he said. "You will not be in my office then. You should take the service stairs out now." The voice in the hallway that said Cole's name was too loud to be casual. The clerk at the desk coughed twice in a way that had meaning. The judge stood without hurry and reached for the door. "Thank you, Your Honor," Nate said. Whitaker did not waste a word. He nodded and faced the hall. They used the back stairs and came into the steam of the kitchen through a door that stuck on its hinges. The snow had thickened. It came fast and slanted, stinging when it hit a cheek. They cut through the alley, kept to the building line, and moved until the lights of town thinned behind them. They found a line shack by feel more than sight. Otis had told them where it would be. The stove smoked for a full minute before the pipe warmed enough to draw right. Riley sat on the floor and set her head against the wall and let her hands shake where she did not have to see them. Nate poured coffee with fingers that did not spill. The room smelled like wet wool and ashes in relief. Morning was a blue scrape of light. Snow lay clean over tracks. They moved before it softened. Otis met them near a stand of cottonwoods, his hat white and his eyes alert. "Tanner Place is gone," he said. "Men say a lamp fell. It did not." Riley's mouth went hard. Nate swallowed. The packet under his coat felt heavier and lighter at once. "We need to tell people," Nate said. Riley nodded. "I will ride Peterson way, then Miller's Draw." She did not ask permission. She went. Otis looked at Nate, and then at the path she had taken, and then at the sky, as if it had a say. He and Nate returned to the ridge and set a fresh brace under the porch to keep the roof from sagging as it thawed. Late afternoon brought a sound like a branch breaking, except it did not stop once. Atlas screamed in the yard. Nate stepped out with his rifle low and ready. Riley came into view from the path along the creek. Her scarf was mostly gone. Blood had dried from a cut along her jaw and made a brown river to her collar. Her coat was torn at the wrist. She walked like a person who had decided to not, because it was easy. Nate reached her before her knees could decide something else. He eased her into a chair, and Otis put coffee in her hand and closed her fingers around the tin. Her breath was shallow until the heat got to her. "Sheriff Pike locked me up," she said. Her voice was ragged and still steady. "Behind the bank. Not the cell. A storeroom." Nate felt heat crawl up his neck that had nothing to do with the stove. "He came with water," Riley said. "He set the cup on the floor where I could reach it through the bars. He set the keys beside it. He argued with a guard in the front room loud enough to be heard. I did the rest." Her knuckles were scraped raw. A bruise rose along her forearm where a rope had left a story. Otis wrapped the cut at her jaw with a strip of linen and a paste that smelled like mint and mud. "Cole hired men out of Miles City," she said. "They were waiting at Peterson's gate. They were bragging about a bonfire. Juniper Ridge, tonight if they can, tomorrow if the wind turns." The cabin seemed to lean closer to hear. Nate looked at the door, at the bullet hole in the wall, at the map rolled tight on the shelf. He felt the well under the yard like a heartbeat. Riley looked at him through the wrap, at her jaw, green eyes bright with fever and stubborn light. Riley's breath steadied. The cut at her jaw oozed and then stopped. Otis tightened the wrap and set his hand a moment on her shoulder, then took it away. Nate looked at Atlas in the yard, at the rifle by the door, at the packet rolled tight on the shelf. He pulled on his coat and checked the magazine by touch. "I go to town," he said. Riley lifted her chin. There was iron in it and fever heat under her skin. "Go," she said. Otis nodded once. "I will sit a spell and listen for trouble." The road to Ash River had new snow that came to the fetlocks. Atlas took it at a ground-eating trot, steam rising off his neck. Sage Creek ran dark under a skin of ice. The town showed itself in flat winter light. Smoke from stovepipes, a dog asleep under a wagon, the piano in the Ash River house doing a tired tune. Nate tied Atlas at the rail in front of the sheriff's office and pushed in through the door. The room smelled of coffee and gun oil. Sheriff Hal Pike stood behind the desk with a lead ledger open and a pen in his hand. He looked up and something passed across his face that had to do with sleep lost and lines crossed. "I am here to file," Nate said. He set the words down like tools. Attempted murder, arson, intimidation of witnesses, men acting under Barrett Cole. Pike's eyes went to the window and back. His star caught the light and threw it on the wall behind him. He reached for a form and set it flat. "Name of complainant," he said. His voice had gravel in it and the steadiness of a man who has decided to stand up. Nathaniel Mercer, Nate said. He gave dates and places and names. He gave the Tanner place burning. He gave bullet holes in log and stone. He kept his anger in his throat where it could do no harm. A shadow crossed the glass. Boots came up the step and stopped. The door opened to a warmth that felt colder than the air outside. Barrett Cole filled the frame. Two men behind him wore coats that did not belong to this county and eyes that said they did not plan to. Mr. Mercer Cole said. His smile was careful. "There you are. Clients wait on me." Clients Pike said. He did not look up from the form. He dipped his pen and wrote, "I am taking a complaint." Cole's gaze shifted to the star and then to Pike's hand, and then to the open page. "Sheriff," he said softly, as if they shared a table no one else could see. "Consider your friends," I have Pike said. He signed his name and sanded the wet ink. His hand was steady. "Take your friends and step back from my door. The town is watching." The street had drawn a crowd while Nate talked, men with hats in their hands, women with shawls thrown over aprons, the blacksmith with tongs still in his grip, Hendry the shopkeeper with his mouth drawn flat. They stood without noise and filled the space with their seeing. Cole's smile drained a shade. "You make a poor choice," he said. The choice came in on boot heels before anyone could answer. Captain Eli Garber pushed through with 6 men behind him. They wore their coats hard and their shoulders square. He tipped 2 fingers at Pike. Sheriff Garber said, "Need deputies." Pike tore strips of paper, wrote names, pinned tin on wool with the quick care of a man tying a tourniquet. "You will answer to the law," he said. Cole's jaw worked. He stepped back, and the men behind him shifted toward the street. He turned, said something low to the hired guns, and went out into the light. They mounted. A boy ran past with a shout that carried. "Headed west," he called, "riding hard." Nate was already in the street. Atlas heard the voice in him and put his ears forward. Garber swung up, checked his cinch, and grinned without merriment. "Ridge," he said. "They went out of town fast enough to make the wind bite." The snow threw back the sun until the world was white and blue and black hoofprints. On the mesa, the air tasted of smoke. The first sight of Juniper Ridge was a column rising where the barn had stood. Sparks lifted and died. The cabin held. Men with rifles moved through the yard like they owned the ground. Riley was inside. Nate felt it before he knew it. He cut wide and came down from the rocks using a line of boulders for cover. Garber split the riders without being told. Pike came in on the far side, his badge bright and his voice raw from yelling commands. Nate dropped from Atlas and took a knee behind a basalt chunk. He worked the bolt and worked and fired, counting under his breath. A man near the porch spun and fell. Another flinched and went low. He shifted to a new angle before anyone could draw a line back to him and sent a round to take a hat clean off without skin. From inside the cabin, the sound of Riley's rifle answered. Clean rhythm, no waste. She shot to stop a man who was about to light a second torch and put him on his back in the snow. Smoke rolled along the eaves and found a place to rise. The gunfire made a hard, steady beat. The air filled with wood dust and the sour of burned hay. Cole hung back near the corral on a powerful gray and sent hand signs the hired men read without words. He saw Nate and put the gray in motion for the creek where the ground looked open. Garber saw too and cut to intercept, but a drift took his horse to the knee and checked him. Nate felt the moment turn. He ran for Atlas, got a hand in the mane swung up on the sore thigh he had earned on the roof last week, and let the pain pass. Atlas knew the work. He went down the draw with his head low and his body flat snow blowing up around his chest. At the bottom, Sage Creek ran half open. Cole forced the gray into the water. Ice broke under iron. The horse lunged and found the far bank. Cole looked back once. That was enough. Nate put Atlas to the edge and jumped when hoof could give no more. The creek water bit like knives and climbed into his boots. He hit the far side when his hands already knew what they would do. He took Cole at the knee. They went off the saddle together and rolled into gravel and ice. The gray tore away with a squeal and a spray of cold. They came up locked. Cole was bigger through the chest and had 20 years of mean-earned clean. He threw a short hook that glanced off Nate's cheekbone and filled one eye with bright. Nate drove his shoulder into Cole's middle and took his wind, and then caught a thumb on a tooth and had his skin cut to prove it. Cole went for his pistol, and Nate got there first, pushed the hand into the mud and held it. The creek spoke in his ear at arm's length. The smell of silt and blood and horse sweat mixed. Cole's teeth were bared. "This land is mine," he hissed. "You and the girl are only 2 names on a list. You have a judge's seal. Nate said. His breath came hard and white. I have one too. Cole bucked under him. For a half-beat, Nate saw how the man could slip him and get to iron. A boot skidded on ice. A knee found a rib and sent a line of fire across his side. He took it and drove his forearm into Cole's throat just enough to freeze him without breaking him. Stop, Hal Pike said. The sheriff's boots threw wet up on both of them, his revolver aimed down, his jaw was set. He will stand in front of a bench. Off him, Mercer. Nate held a fraction longer, not for payback, for the feel of choosing not to. He pushed off and opened his hands. The cold flooded where heat had lived. Pike cuffed Cole with quick practiced motions and read him charges until the man looked sick of hearing his own name pinned to ugly words. Garber rode up on a lathered horse and pointed with his chin toward the cabin. Inside, he said, "Go." The yard stank of wet ash and powder. A dead man lay with snow on his lashes. Another crawled to the fence and let his gun fall and put his hands up to anyone with authority. Pike shouted orders that men obeyed because they needed a voice, and he had found his. Garber's deputies tied horses, kicked smoking boards flat, and turned bodies face down. Nate shouldered through the door into a room gray with smoke. Riley stood by the hearth where the new mortar had not quite cured. Her face was streaked with soot, and a line of dried blood cut across her jaw wrap. Her hair had come loose and stuck to her cheek. The rifle in her hands sat open at the breech. Her eyes found him. They widened and then softened and then steadied all inside a breath. He crossed the room in 3 steps and took her by the elbows first, as if to test the fact of her. She let the rifle tip and bounce on the table, then put her hands to his coat and gripped it. They stood that way while the smoke wrote shapes above their heads and the world outside arranged itself into order. "Atlas," she said finally. "In the yard," he said. Mad with himself. "Fine." She nodded once. She looked past him at the light through the holes the bullets had made. She looked at the table where the map lay, rolled and bound. She looked at his face like she was getting used to it. Garber came to the doorway and tipped his hat a fraction as near to a smile as he got on a day like this. "Cole is in irons," he said. His men did not hold. Pike found his voice. Riley's eyes cut to Nate. She did not say a thing. She did not need to. The stove ticked as it cooled. A little flame at the back of the firebox kept living and would not quit. Outside, men moved with the rhythm of work. They dragged buckets to drown stray embers. They straightened a fence post that had tilted and wedged it with rocks. Someone righted a chair that had flipped on the porch and brushed snow from the seat and set it where a person could sit. Nate and Riley stepped into the yard. The barn was a black ribcage. The cabin stood. The well cover sat propped against the wall, and water talked deep underfoot as if it had not missed a beat. Pike led Cole past with Garber at his shoulder. Cole's cuffs clicked. He looked smaller. The gold chain at his vest was snapped and hung loose. Pike paused a second. He met Nate's eye and then Riley's. He did not ask for thanks. He did not offer apology. He touched the star at his chest as if to make sure it was still there and then walked on. Otis came out from behind the chimney with a grin that creased his whole face. "I told the ridge to hold," he said. It did. Riley let out a breath she had kept too long. Her hand found Nate's without looking. His palm was torn where a tooth had taken it. Her thumb went across the cut and came back clean. The sky was clear and thin. Smoke rose in a narrow line and broke apart in the cold. The creek kept on with its winter talk. Men's voices dropped and settled. A magpie landed on a charred beam and cocked its head and flew off. Nate squeezed Riley's hand and felt her answer. He looked at the place where the barn had been and saw lumber stacked in his mind without trying to see it. He saw posts plumb and line true. He did not say it. He did not need to. He felt the ground under his boots and the water under the ground and the pressure of her fingers in his. The ridge stood with them while the steam rose off the ruin and the sun found whatever warmth it could lay on wood and stone. Snow held to the black ribs of the barn until the sun took it by inches. Smoke bled up from ash pits and went thin in the sharp air. Men trod the yard with ropes over shoulders and fresh lumber on their backs. The hammering had a steady rhythm, clean and sure. Juniper scraped the wind and made the same hush it had made before any of them arrived. Nate carried a beam with Garber and set the tenon into the mortise Riley had cut. The fit took a mallet and a breath and then seeded with a sound that made 4 men smile without looking at one another. Otis Crow brought over a new well cover planed smooth from cedar and tapped it with his knuckles. He knocked 3 times the old rhythm he kept for luck, then set it level and oiled the hinges until they moved like good leather. By noon, the yard smelled of sap and coffee and cold iron. Sheriff Hal Pike rode in with 2 deputies and reined up short. Cole was not with him. The star on Pike's chest had a new shine as if the metal had picked up light. He came down stiff and spoke in a low voice that carried. "Prisoner is on the eastbound coach under guard," he said. "Affidavits from the Tanner fire and the attack here are in my desk." Judge Whitaker's notice ran in the paper at sunup. I posted a copy on the courthouse door. He let that rest. Men nodded. A woman from town apron over her coat handed him a cup. He drank and set it carefully on a post and left it there. When he rode away, he touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat to Riley and then to Nate and then to the ridge itself. The church hall in Ash River filled before the bell finished its ring. Lanterns hung from pegs and gave the room the honey light of harvest. Hendry laid the big table bare, and someone spread Patrick Quinn's map across it. The seal at the corner looked like it meant to stay. Chalk rattled in a dish. Whitaker was not there, but his words were inked in a hand that left no room to be misunderstood. Riley stood with a palm on the map near the square for Juniper Ridge. Garber leaned on his good leg and watched the room without seeming to. The blacksmith spoke for the men by the forges. A miner with grit on his cuffs spoke for the families who lived near the cut. Mrs. Tanner stood near the end of the table with a scarf at her throat and her jaw set like stone in winter. Hendry chalked lines as people named creeks and draws. A boy ran in with a bucket of bluing and a brush. He stood on a chair and painted the aquifer as a vein that fed them all. The room quieted to watch. The brush left a line that looked like a promise, deep and clean. They spoke until their mouths went dry, and then they raised hands. When it was done, a paper on the table named a council, and the names were not all men. Riley Quinn for Juniper Ridge, Eli Garber for the South Range, Mrs. Tanner for the families along Miller Draw, Hendry for the town merchants, Emil Kovacs for the men who cut rock. There were others enough to say the valley had found a way to sit together. They signed in a line and sanded the ink and hung the paper with 2 nails on the hall wall beside the map. Outside in the hard light, men pried open a gate at the head of a lateral ditch that had been shut for a season. The board came free, and the water moved with a sound like a throat clearing. Children trotted along the bank and stuck fingers into the flow and laughed at the cold. Mrs. Tanner stepped back from the edge, closed her eyes, and lifted her chin into the fine mist. No one spoke to her. They let her have the sound and the spray. Back on the ridge, the cabin wore a new lintel. The door hung true. The floor did not complain underfoot. Ash had been shoveled and scattered where it would do some good. The old posts, the ones that still had a fight in them, stood beside new timbers like elders beside sons. Atlas pushed his nose into Nate's shoulder for grain and snorted when he did not get it fast enough. Riley laughed at that. It was the rough, honest sound of a person who had been given back something she had not named. Otis sat on the well cover and worked a length of rawhide between his hands. He ran it through the loop on the broken pocket watch chain and tied it off with a neat square knot. He handed it to Riley without a word. She turned and pressed it into Nate's palm. "Silas's time is not lost," she said, only nodded to this ground. The watch lay cool and heavy. The rawhide creaked when Nate lifted it. He slipped the chain through a buttonhole and let the case settle against his vest. The tick could be felt more than heard, a small pulse under the larger beat of work in the yard. Men finished what daylight would allow. They stacked boards where the barn would rise and left them under canvas. They coiled rope so it would not freeze into shapes no one wanted. They went home with hands stained and lungs full of sawdust and smoke. The yard got quiet in the way a field gets quiet when the plow is no longer moving. Riley brewed coffee with the last of the boil and set a tin cup into Nate's hands and kept the other for herself. They stood on the porch with their shoulders brushing and watched steam climb into the afternoon air. The sky had gone the color of pewter and then found its blue again. Sage Creek talked in its winter voice, steady as a heart in sleep. From somewhere below, deeper than the creek, the aquifer spoke in its long language. Inside the table held Patrick's notes weighed down with a smooth rock. The rifle leaned where it could see the door. The floorboards had been swept until the wood showed its old grain. A line of wet footprints came in and faded and did not return. Garber came by at dusk and set a sack on the step, rope, nails, a jar of salve for torn hands. He did not stay for coffee. He met Nate's eye and Riley's and tipped his hat and turned his horse toward the road without a word. When his hoofbeats thinned, the ridge took back its hush and held it. They ate meat and biscuits that tasted of smoke and the kind of hunger that earns what it gets. The lamp made two halos on the wall and left the upper corners in friendly dark. Nate worked a sliver from his palm with the point of a pin, and Riley reached across and took the pin and set it down and turned his hand over in hers. The cuts ran like river maps across his skin. She traced one with her thumb. He felt the touch in his chest and let his breath go slower. They stepped out into the yard when the stars found their proper places. The air sharpened. The boards at the new lintel cooled and gave a small complaint that meant nothing. A fox barked twice on the slope and went silent. The smell of cedar from the well cover reached them where they stood. Riley leaned her shoulder against his and did not move it away. Nate set his hand over hers and felt the matching ruff of palm and the warmth that lived under it. The chain at his vest ticked. The creek said the same thing it had said when he first laid his cheek to the well plank and listened. It said there was a way through stone if you were patient and exact. They stayed until the cold made sense of itself, and the sky had gone from black to a shade that had weight to it. They went inside and latched the door. The latch sat square in its keep and made a decent sound. Morning woke to saw teeth and the call of a man measuring by eye. Juniper Ridge answered with a beam set true and a post plumb and the hollow thump of nails driven where they should go. The valley moved under the same light, with lines drawn and water running where blue had been painted. The hands that held hammers and bridles and ledgers bore new marks that would not wash off in a week. Nate lifted the bucket from the well and tipped it until metal touched lip and water ran. He filled the kettle and set it to heat and watched the surface settle and mirror the rafters. Riley crossed the room behind him, and her sleeve brushed his back, and he knew the sound of her foot on the floor by weight and length of step. The watch ticked at his chest. The ground under the boards held the slow talk of the aquifer, old and generous and certain. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.